But what I want to talk to you now, because this is not so much about that, but I want to talk about the separation of church and state. And I want to talk to you about the second letter that was written. The second letter, and format looks very much like this. If you go on the webpage, you're going to see it, and you'll have a chance to read it. But I'm going to read it with you today. This letter was addressed to the ambassadors to the UN. So what does that mean? We sent one to the Secretary General, and then we sent one to the leading ambassador for every country that's a member of the United Nations, except for two. I chose not to send two. One, because one absolutely deserves a custom letter. And I'll let you talk to me afterwards. You can guess which one that is. And another one just had its president arrested and brought to the United States. So you can guess which one that one was. So this letter was written, and I want to read it to you. I think you'll find it interesting. It's titled, we do the salutation. You should see the titles these folks have. It's amazing that these titles are around in this day and age. I don't want to say too much because I respect these individuals, and I'm hoping some of them may even Google around and find this presentation. But you start this letter with Your Excellency, because that's the proper way to refer to an ambassador to the United Nations. We said this: we write to you out of the deep respect for your office and for the grave responsibility borne by those entrusted with the governance of nations. We write this letter to warn you of a growing threat to the sovereignty of your country and all the UN member states. Now, mind you, when you write a letter like this, you need to write it because you're writing to someone who you know is a secular mind. You know it's someone that may not know about Christianity. By the time you get to the UN, they all know about Christianity. But they're coming from very different backgrounds. And so this is what we say. The UN is fundamentally a Western institution founded to govern the conduct of nations. It exercises moral, political, and legal influence over both the external and internal affairs of the nations. It was founded by the great powers of the West and was the culmination of the development of Western values. Western history reveals an inherent weakness of Western governments, a weakness that appears to be ready for exploitation, this time against all the world's governments. True freedom has been rare throughout human history. This is true of the West as much as anywhere else. In the West, despotism has usually taken the form of a union of church and state. That's a big statement to make, but if you look at history, this is true, and any true student of history, which I believe these ambassadors are, will recognize this. Once such a union is formed, both institutions, church and state, inevitably cooperate to suppress internal dissent, whether religious, philosophical, political, or economic. History confirms that a union of church and state formed the foundation of all European tyranny prior to the rise of communism and its socialist children. And you could argue that communism itself is a union of church and state. It's just a different church, the church of atheism. In contrast, freedom is fundamentally the child of Christianity, but not any form of Christianity. Freedom is fundamentally the gift of Protestant Christianity. In the 17th century, two major developments in the West brought about freedom, both personal freedoms and national freedom or state sovereignty. The first development came from a Protestant Puritan turned Baptist minister, Roger Williams, who founded the first modern free society in Rhode Island. His government was based upon the principle that all individuals were granted freedom from our Creator in matters of religion and conscience. Therefore, he established the strict separation of church and state. His political philosophy was founded on Christ's words, "Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." And Christ's statement to Pontius Pilate that my kingdom is not of this world. Accordingly, the state should have nothing to do with matters pertaining to God, and the church should not interfere with secular matters of state. The second development arose out of the religious wars of the Reformation, culminating in the Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia was based on the same biblical principles of freedom that Roger Williams espoused, applied to states rather than individuals. Westphalia established the nation-state system in the world today, replacing the Holy Roman Empire, which was jointly ruled by the Holy See and the Emperor. Now, this is amazing, and this is something that as Protestants we're trained not to know. And that is state sovereignty and the nation system today really is from Westphalia. And do you know what the Peace of Westphalia is? I think my European brother probably does. But this is the 30 Years' War. This is the Protestant Wars of the Reformation. And it's only because of this piece that we have the nation-state system today. And when you read UN documents, they'll even give credit to that. While Westphalia did not establish internal religious liberty as Roger Williams had in Rhode Island, it was a very important step in that direction as it recognized religious liberty for individual states, thus creating state sovereignty. Westphalia established the first system of international law that recognized that religious diversity was a permanent political reality. Pope Innocent X issued a papal brev, Zelo Dominus Dei, condemning the Peace of Westphalia, declaring the treaties null, void, invalid, unjust, damnable, reprobate, inane, and without force or effect. Understandably, as the Peace of Westphalia excluded the Holy See from ever assuming the role of supreme arbiter of the political order of Europe and from all diplomatic authority. The great beacons of liberty, including John Locke, Benjamin Franklin, William Penn, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison, were all the progeny of the Protestant pastor Roger Williams and the Protestant reformers and soldiers who gave the world the Peace of Westphalia. These men, following principles laid down in the Bible and championed by the Protestant Reformation, recognized that religious liberty and freedom of conscience were granted by the Creator, as well as life and all of its legitimate pursuits, and were therefore inalienable and not the creation or gift of a monarch or a state. The legacy of these men is the freedom and sovereignty humanity enjoys today instead of universal empire. The French Revolution closely followed the American Revolution and was greatly influenced by the Americans, but differed in a number of fundamental principles. The French Revolution was a reaction against the union of church and state in France, specifically the Roman Catholic Church. In persecuting and outlawing the Catholic Church, the French established atheism, a religion by another name. In outlawing religion, the French secured freedom, but at the same time sowed the seeds of their own destruction. Unlike the American system, which recognized inherent inalienable rights granted by God, the French system gave lip service to inherent rights, but recognized them only if granted by the state, and thus could limit them at any time that suited the state's purposes. Thus, state-granted rights were merely privileges, always subject to curtailment or revocation. This is the same political theory espoused in Article 29 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 18, paragraph 3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, adopted by the UN in 1976, provides a good example of a purported right to freedom of religion, where the exceptions to the right is so broad that the right is rendered illusory. Make no mistake, a political system that cannot tolerate religion and inalienable rights given by God will devolve into its own form of tyranny, as can be seen in the French Revolution's progeny, such as the Soviet Union, other communist regimes, and various governments that suppress religion rather than provide for religious freedom. The dangerous thing about writing a letter like this is you're writing to some of these communist regimes. Most often, this first takes the form of restrictions on freedom of speech. And this is another thing, make no mistake about. The United States is one of the few countries in the entire world where we have absolute freedom of speech. It's not in Canada, certainly not in England. Look what's going on there. It's not anywhere in the EU. I suppose that there's probably some island nations that made their constitution based on ours that have it. But I don't know of any leading nations that can field a navy that have it, except us. Most often, this first takes the form of restrictions on freedom of speech, but quickly evolves to limit other freedoms of religious adherents or political opponents. Today, the UN facilitates and oversees global spiritual ecumenical projects. In doing so, it is uniting with religion. The union of church and state within the United Nations poses the same threat of empire and tyranny that the old union of church and state in medieval Europe was bound by. While it may seem beneficial to unite with religion to achieve stability and prosperity, when religion meddles in the affairs of the state, religion always seeks her own goals and agendas. In the case of the UN, the most influential, preeminent religious body is the Holy See. Now, this is one of the interesting things. While there are all these other religions at the UN, the Holy See, which is what they call the papacy, is in everything. Everywhere. The tentacles are deep. And I'm hoping that any ambassador who's reading this will recognize that out of experience. It is the only religious organization with observer status and is the most influential religious voice in the UN's deliberative and administrative bodies. The Holy See is the lone holdover from Europe's ancient regime. That's that old empire, right? It's the kings and things. And opposed to the principles of the Peace of Westphalia. When there is a union of church and state, the tendency is for a universal empire, with the church being a tool of the capital of the empire to exert power over vassal states, particularly unwilling vassal states. The church is uniquely able to cross international borders with its influence. Ultimately, the church can and will use its power to dominate the political power. The history of Europe repeatedly demonstrates this. Today, the UN is in danger of repeating European history. Amazingly, the same papal authority and preeminence, exercising its influence over all other religions through the ecumenical projects of the UN and other powerful religious coalitions. We are particularly concerned by the accelerating movement toward ecumenical religious coordination within UN structures. For numerous reasons, in various parts of the world, there is a movement towards a universal Sunday observance. The international foundations of this have already been laid in many states by agreements made under the League of Nations and later adopted by the UN. Yeah, that's true. Many countries put forth for the League of Nations that they were adopting a day of rest, that was one of their national goals. So this goes all the way back to just after World War I. And it's just been sleeping there dormant. Did any of you know that? I didn't know that until just recently. And yet when the UN comes in, it adopts this and it comes into the UN, right? And the letter goes on to say this: Sunday sacredness is associated with Christianity, but it is never taught in the Bible. Rather, it was established by the Roman Catholic Church and imposed by the Roman Empire as a mark of the Roman Catholic Church's authority. The biblical day of rest is the seventh day established by God at the creation for all mankind. Be certain you will hear agitation for a global universal day of rest, but also recognize that any action taken by the UN or any state to enforce a day of rest, any day of rest, is a union of church and state, and fundamentally is the state doing the bidding of the church. Tyranny always seeks conformity and submission. Religion, when unified with political authority, has always proven to be a powerful instrument to coerce both states and individuals. For the above reasons, we respectfully urge you to A, recognize that the union of church and state, particularly a union operating globally, constitutes a clear and present threat to personal liberty and state sovereignty. And B, assist in the safeguarding of liberty and your nation's sovereignty by supporting the removal of Protestant churches where their members explicitly call for such a withdrawal, and to specifically assist the members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to withdraw from association with the UN, even though the bureaucracy of the Seventh-day Adventist Church may express a desire to stay. Think about that for a second. We've got really big shoes to fill. Do you realize what's being said here? We're giving credit where credit is due, and the credit is the Protestant Reformation is what got this world freedom. But now what we're asking for is we're asking to be released from this union. Why? So that we can assure the world of freedom. Are we up to that task? Are we? By God's grace. By God's grace. And we all know how this all ends, right? And I'm not here to preach 1,000 years of peace, right? But we have to be that beacon. And the way I read Bible prophecy, it can be none other than us. And faithful Protestants who join us. And believe me, they're there. I just had the opportunity to spend some time in a little place in Virginia called Orange County. And this is really just the heart of all the people that were writing the Constitution of the United States. Thomas Jefferson lived there. James Madison lived there. They were arguing about all the religious liberty stuff right there. And the one thing that was the most encouraging thing is we went to one of the churches where there had been some persecution. It was famous for being involved in this, right? we sat down and we talked to the pastor. He had this little museum set up and all this other kind of stuff. And to listen to that guy talk, he sounded just like an old school Protestant when it came to religious liberty. And I'm going, man, you're one of us. And I'm talking to him and we're talking and I'm asking, so what about your church? What do you have for like a religious liberty department? Do you have someone that represents you in Washington or something like that? And it was interesting because he said something that I probably would have said something similar to him. He says, yeah. He says, we have something there. They're fairly active. I can't remember exactly all the different things he said, but one of the things that he did say, though, he says, but they kind of aren't espousing these same things anymore. And you could sense that he wasn't pleased. It tells me a couple of things. One is there's no one there to fight, which is what I started at the beginning. We got to go fight. And we're uniquely capable of this. But I'm also here to tell you that this message expresses the character of God. And the other Protestants will come and join, the ones that see this, right? And it won't just be Protestants, I'm convinced. If you read Alexis de Tocqueville and stuff, you realize it's Catholics too. People that understand. So we have big shoes to fill. I got to keep going. Time's going to run out. And I go on to say, or the letter goes on to say this, it is essential to the freedom and sovereignty of all nations, including your nation, that free and independent Protestant churches exist to champion the principles of freedom and the separation of church and state. The members of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in agreement with true Protestants globally, affirm that liberty of conscience is not granted by governments, institutions, or international bodies. Freedom of conscience is endowed by God and must remain forever beyond the reach of political expediency or any governmental system. Any nation that denies this truth ultimately forges the chains of its own oppression. We therefore respectfully appeal to you to stand on the side of freedom, freedom grounded in the principle of separation of church and state, to assist us in preserving this liberty for future generations. Should you wish to engage with us further in this matter or learn more about the history of the biblical foundations of true political and personal liberty, we would welcome dialogue with you. We would also welcome any advice you could give us to help us realize our goal. And that has been sent to the ambassadors. But we need to embody true liberty. I go back and I look at Alexis de Tocqueville. He's a French politician, ambassador, came over to the United States and wrote about us. And I just love some of the things he said. It's coming around the early 1800s. He says this, Americans so completely confound Christianity with liberty that it is almost impossible to induce them to think of one without the other. For them, moreover, this is by no means a sterile belief, a legacy of the past that lives smoldering in the depths of the soul, but a vital article of faith. We need that. We have a job to do because we got a country that doesn't know its past. It doesn't know anything. I hate to say it. It's just ruled by feelings we learned. He goes on to say this, but when religion, talking about separation of church and state, when religion embraces the bitter passions of this world, it may be forced to defend its allies acquired through interest rather than love, and it must reject its adversaries, men who love it still, even as they do battle with its allies. So not only you have separation of church and state, but the church has to be separated from the political fray. And this is so opposite of what we have today. It says, religion cannot share the material made of those who govern without incurring some of the hatred they inspire. And isn't that true? If you try to use religion to support a political candidate and that candidate's out of favor with the person you're talking to, what do they think about you? Yeah, you can't unite the two. He goes on to say this, in Europe, Christianity allowed itself to become the close ally of all temporal powers. Today, these powers are collapsing, and Christianity finds itself buried, as it were, beneath the debris. So he's talking about Europe, right? And he's talking at the time when the ancient regime is finally going away. A living thing that has been lashed to cadavers. Okay, he's talking about the problem of a living church being lashed to a dead state. But we've got the same thing brewing right now, because we know how this all ends, right? You can't be lashed to the state because you will be the living thing tied to the dead. And he goes on and he says, cut the ties that bind to the dead, and it will rise again. I'm running out of time. I want to go to the next one. Forgive me. This is from Spirit of Prophecy. It says this, unless the church, which is now being leavened with her own backsliding, shall repent and be converted, she will eat of the fruit of her own doing until she shall abhor herself. When she resists the evil and chooses the good, when she seeks God with all humility and reaches her high calling in Christ, standing on the platform of eternal truth, and by faith laying hold upon the attainments prepared for her, she will be healed. She will appear in her God-given simplicity and purity, separate from earthly entanglements, showing that the truth has made her free indeed. Then her members will indeed be the chosen of God, his representatives. That's a call to us. We need to be separate. And you know, when you look at Revelation 18, I really believe that this is where we are in time. And you go to Revelation 18, and what do you see? You see this mighty angel, which some expositors, and I tend to agree, see the mighty angel is actually being Christ. But be that as it may, what do we have with Revelation 18? It's the final call to humanity. It's essentially a repetition of the three angels' messages, but it's a little bit different. But I want to read verse 4. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye receive not of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. The call is to come out of her, my people. In order to call someone out, we have to be out. And it has to be unequivocally clear to the entire world that we're out. And so, no matter how the UN might fit into end-time prophecy and end-time events, that's not really the issue. The real issue is that the UN clearly is part of a global ecumenical movement dominated by the Holy See, espousing principles completely counter to the Protestant Reformation. Principles that are counter to the beliefs of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And we could go down them one by one. And all I can say is, we need to be out.